conference on AI Art 2022. The conference is hosted by Tongji University, organized by Art and Artificial Intelligence in the College of Design and Innovation and Aiiii Art Center. I'm C from Aiiii Art Center. I'm going to be the host of this session. So in this session, the time is from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. The theme of this year is Quantum of Quantum of Quantum, Artificial Imagination. In session 3, we are going to have 5 speakers. And after their speeches, there is going to be a 30-minute panel talk following. Everyone in the webinar can type your questions in QA box directly. Now, let's have our first speaker, Chen Qiufan, Stanley Chan. Stanley Chan is an award-winning Chinese speculative fiction writer, translator, curator, and also creative producer. He is also author of Waste Tide and AI2041, Take Visions of Our Future. Now let's have Stanley. Hello.
Hello. Thank you, Professor Lee, and thanks AAI for having me to this prestige panel and forum. I'm looking forward to share with you the latest book, AI2041. So now I'm gonna share my presentation. So here we go. All right, so today I'm gonna talk a little bit how we're gonna design the future with science fiction, and the title is Think Beyond. So as Harari, the author of *Sapien: A Brief History of Mankind*, he mentioned like today science fiction will be the most important artistic genre. And when accepting the interview from Wired magazine. So I think because what he really mean is like in the coming decades, we're facing all this kind of challenge and risk coming along with the acceleration of technology, and science fiction actually help us to prepare our mentality and from a cognitive level. But what is science fiction really? So there are so many definitions across different time and from different region, countries of the world. I just pick up the most simple one. But as you can see, there's so many words I put in different colors, which is arguable. Like science fiction is that branch of literature that deals with human responses to change the level of science and technology. But as we all know now, science fiction is way broader than the format of literature and text, but also penetrating into film, TV, animation, video game, architect, and design in a broader sense, and also is kind of like the human-centric as well, because we think about robots, think about AI, alien, monsters, and even other species co-living on this planet. And also when we think about science and technology, it's also arguable because we know the boundary of science is always changing. The dynamic of between different disciplinaries is also be reshaped from time to time. So I would say people always ask what's the relationship between sci-fi and technology, especially from an innovation perspective. We can always say like Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea inspired the engineer and also designer Simon Lake to design the modern submarine, and also the engineer Martin Cooper back in the 70s, who used to work for Motorola. He got this idea from the Star Trek TV series back in the 60s. And also there's so many inspiration from TVs, animation, fictions, and inspire people doing the tech and to invent something from imagination into reality. But I want to argue that the relationship between the two is not as obvious as we always try to think. This kind of like interaction and intertwining is actually more implicit than we try to put on the paper. So I will show you the timeline of AI in real world and also in the science fiction world. So you can see that even before Alan Turing published the important thesis, Can Machine Think? And also before Dartmouth Summer Research defined artificial intelligence as a term. So Isaac Asimov, he wrote so many stories about how human beings coexist with AI, robots, machine in a pretty much futuristic societies. And during this long ups and downs of artificial intelligence, there are so many predictions from both scientists and also science fiction writers. For example, in 1968, like Arthur C. Clarke, and working together with Stanley Kubrick, they imagined by the year 2001, we can have the machines with intelligence that match or exceed humans. And also, the father of AI, Marvin Minsky, he predicted that in 1970, from 3 to 8 years, we will have the machine with the general intelligence of a human being, which we all know that none of them became true. But we also can see there's so many discussion, so many narratives in science fiction and interacting with the science and technology in the lab, in the institute, and even in the army. So I think there's so many interesting ideas, like try to help us to think beyond the technology itself, but also to create this kind of imagination about the relationship between human beings with the technology. So I want to briefly introduce 3 booms of Chinese science fiction back in the history, because in my perspective, science fiction in China is not continuously developed. It's totally different with the trend in the Western society, like in UK, from 1818, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. And afterward, it got blossomed in United States and become the huge global industry of entertainment. But in China, it seems like each period of time, the booms actually raise some critical questions to the context of the society back in the day. So for example, the first boom actually happened almost 100 years ago, when revolutionary thinkers and also activists like Liang Qichao and Lu Xun, they started to translate science fiction and even wrote some by themselves. They introduced this genre, mostly utopian, into China in order to reshape the ideology of Chinese nationalism. And they try to ask the question, what's the relationship of modern China with the old dynasties? So they try to introduce the scientific spirits and narrative to reshape the society from a broader sense. But they fail anyways, but they totally prepare culturally, spiritually for the later on 1919 new culture revolution. And also the second book actually happened after the open and reform in 1978. And that was when Ye Yonglie, one of my favorite science fiction writers, he wrote 小灵通漫游未来, is talking about the autonomous society and also the robotic servant in each family. And everything is become so utopian in the 21st century China. So I think that give people a rosé color, hope, and pretty much positive imagination of the future after 10 years cultural revolution. So during the period of time, people argue about like whether science fiction is supposed to be super scientific and aligned with the facts and knowledge. Otherwise, is like we supposed to have some flexibility to navigate and explore the possibility, and the main purpose is try to connect and enlighten the people with storytelling. And the third way actually is from 1999 until today, we can see this new boom of Chinese fiction actually is trying to answer one question. So what makes science fiction, Chinese science fiction, Chinese, is actually the same question about how we identify ourselves as part of the globalization, and how we try to recognize ourselves from the root of ancient traditional culture, but also try to connect to the modernity and science and technology framework of thinking. So you can see like this new boom, three-body problem, including Beijing, etc., got translated into other languages and become phenomenal internationally, and even making to blockbusters and totally reshape the younger generation. So I think after this brief introduction, I want to say,
Stanley.
Yeah.
Sorry to disturb you. Actually, there are two gray boxes cover your PowerPoint. Do you mind to reshare it, but without optimizing the video for slides? There are two, sort of like your PowerPoint was be covered by a bit. Probably you share it again, but without optimizing video for slides.
Okay. So is it okay? I'm not
yes,
sure.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, because I didn't try this feature before. Okay. So yeah, so after like the short introduction of the Chinese science fiction history, I want to ask the question like, what can we learn from science fiction really? I think to me, like science fiction has this kind of like characteristic to help people think beyond all those binaries, because we can see all this narrative is actually dealing with this kind of binary concepts and definitions, like from the history with the future, from fiction to reality, from humanity with science and technology, with national or international, from the self as human being or otherness as like alien, robots, and AI. So I think science fiction is not about either or, but it's about the flexibility and openness, how to interact with different kind of like binary concepts. So I think this is how science fiction try to mobilize people and reshape our connection and mindset. So I'll talk about like my personal experience from the very current publication, how we're gonna think beyond technology and locality, even like medium and human-centric perspective as well. So I want to talk about this book is actually collaborated by me and Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, who's the famous AI scientist, investor. And also he used to be the head of Google China and Microsoft. So 2 years ago, he reached out to me and told me that he had an idea of writing a book, blending the genre of fiction and nonfiction. So to talking about how AI as a technology gonna reshape our society over the next 20 years. So I think that was a totally brilliant idea, and that's something I would love to do, because we all know there's so many misunderstandings on AI, and there's so many concernings and worries about how AI gonna dominate human civilization, and how they're gonna take away our jobs, etc., etc. So I think we try to figure out the way that how we can merge our perspective, because he's totally from a scientist and tech and engineering perspective, and to me it's like I'm more rather much more like a storytelling person, storyteller. So how we gonna merge our perspective? So I'm gonna show a little bit of the.
We met in a virtual reality game. He lives in Brazil, I live in China. Soon, we were messaging all day and night. After 2 years, he wants to meet in person. But how can we meet when I'm afraid to leave my apartment? Outside these walls, the pandemic rages on, a permanent threat. AI helped discover vaccines, but the virus mutates fast. Inside these walls, I'm safe. The building's robots bring me everything. Does a relationship require contact? What is love for the COVID generation? This is AI2041.
Yes, so this is the story we're set in Shanghai, which looks pretty interesting right now. So we spent like 6 months sitting together and have all kind of discussion and interviewing the scholars, researchers, and even entrepreneurs doing AI relevant studies or tech startup companies. So we try to map out a roadmap of how AI as a technology gonna evolve over the next decades. And we try to repackage each one of these technologies, such as natural language processing, facial recognition, computer vision, deepfake, etc., into different scenarios. And from there, I'll start to attach each package with different kind of cultural background, different kind of identity, and finally, I need to find a story which is coherent and compelling to tell a story of AI from different industry and perspective. For example, this story is actually called Contactless Lab, is happened in Shanghai. Is talking about how in the future, what if like the virus still mutating, and we have to find a way to coexist with it, with the technology such as AlphaFold. We can predict the protein structure folding, and we can prepare the vaccine and medication in a fast pace, and also how we can tracking people's daily behavior in the metaverse as a digital human, but still we can protect their privacy. And also how can we use biosensors to help people understand the status of their vaccination, and also like how they're healthy status by all this kind of biomarkers. But deep down, I think we're talking about humanity. Like people had this kind of traumatic experience during the COVID, how we gonna help them to step out this kind of like conflict zone or like traumatized memories with the help of technology and social designing. And this is really the way we build up each one of the story. And also, as a Chinese science fiction writer, I will always be asked like, what you write about supposed to be highly attached with Chinese background, Chinese culture, whatsoever. But I really want to say that science fiction is something beyond the borderlines of geopolitics, nationality, and even like a belief system and species. So we intentionally decided to set 10 different stories in 10 locations around the world, and most of them are based in global South country, because in my opinion, in the future, AI is supposed not to only be beneficial to those AI superpower countries such as US, China, and EU, but also is supposed to working and serving people living all around the world, especially developing countries. So there are so many stories in this book. I'm not gonna elaborate each one of those, but it all happened in different countries like Nigeria, talking about deepfake technology. And also in Japan, we're talking about digital human and how we're gonna turn this kind of virtual idol into an industry. And also talking about AI education in Seoul and how we're gonna customize education with the help of natural language processing, and how we're gonna get over this kind of educational resource inequality. So this is something this book tried to say is like the futures of AI is plural. So it's not about just one single perspective of how AI gonna co-evolve and interact with human beings, no matter it's like individually or as a society. But more importantly, we need to create some consensus that as a human being, as a civilization, we need to face all these kind of challenges ahead of us beyond all the border lines and binaries, and it required wisdom and beliefs. So I think science fiction can play a role as the interface to inspire and mobilize people to reshape a more flexible and future-oriented mindset, and to shape a culture as a compassionate species. So also we try a lot of experimental formats, like we try to think beyond the mediums. We work with this emerging NFT platform, TR Lab, and we invited digital artists from all around the world to create NFT based on stories from the book, and we auctioned it and sold it, and we even like discuss, we have this kind of book club on Discord, and we have AMA, everything. So try to be much more engaging with our audience, because they are not only those who are traditional sci-fi readers, but those who have huge curiosity and interest on how technology gonna reshape our future. So even like we are curating an offline exhibition in Shanghai. So, but because of the pandemic, it got postponed. So hopefully Shanghai can get open up pretty soon. Then we can have everyone to visit the on-site exhibition to share this immersive, futuristic storytelling from different formats. So of course, we went to so many different events across different disciplinary to share our ideas. And finally, last but not the least, I want to talk about how we can think beyond human in a science fiction perspective. So because we're always dealing with this kind of relationship between human beings with the other species, no matter it's like monster, AI, alien, whatsoever. So that's the very original idea from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So it's become a motif of science fiction until today. So I think right now the latest version of the otherness is AI. So it always be portrayed as like some kind of competitive, bleak, even like hostile imageries. And I think there's so many projections is actually from human ourselves. So how can we create a different kind of imagination of AI beyond the binary of fear and flavor? So that's by intuition, like how human beings respond to something totally different and distinguished from our own species and civilization. So that's how I gonna start to work with AI from 2017. That's the year when Google launched Attention Mechanism and Transformer, and later on OpenAI uplifting the algorithm to another level. Right now we have GPT-3 and even more advanced version of it. So we can generate some graphics and also sentences. It's quite nuanced and natural and fluent. Just as I would say, like some kids in the elementary school can write. So I think this is something I really want to do. In the 2020, we do an even bigger scale of the experimental writing project. We invited many other science fiction writers and even mainstream award-winning science fiction writers to join our project. So we built up this model called co-creation, that how people can have the machine learn their writing style and as an assistant creatively collaborate with the human writers, and they co-write something as a science fiction. So, and the others, they got the right to guess which part is from machine, which part from AI, from human. So I think this is something, as a science fiction writer, we have the privilege to do, to help people to think beyond this kind of fear and flavor relationship between human and the machine, and try to be open to have this kind of more flexible engagement with the technology, which might you never even know what it is in the future. So one of the most touching word about the book AI2041 is actually from Dr. Joshua Kim. He's the director of DCAL from Georgetown University. So he phrased the book is an elegant method for looking backward from the future. And I think what he's talking about here, and also a lot of schools, a lot of teachers, they're using this book to teach and interact with the students, is the way that the book was curating is actually helping people to step in that kind of futuristic thinking in a more speculative way. So people can actually sharing the comparing storytelling. Meanwhile, he can totally reflexively imagine that what if I'm living in that kind of situation, and what's the right attitude and relationship I suppose to hold on to between a human being with the technology such as AI and robots. And therefore, they try to create this kind of consensus. What if we try to make the world a better, more sustainable and good for all, what should we do? What should we make the change from now on? So I think that's something only science fiction can do. And that's what I love to invite it, each one of you, and maybe more like architect, designers, and scholars to help us to shape this kind of futuristic storytelling. So I think, yeah, think beyond and take action. So that's my sharing today. So looking forward to the conversation later. Thank you.